Female intern fell asleep on stranger's shoulders on a bus, not knowing he's a CEO millionaire. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The steady hum of the city bus mixed with the low chatter of passengers and the soft squeal of brakes at every stop. The air smelled faintly of rain and cold metal. Outside the window, New York blurred by in streaks of yellow and gray. It was 7:40 in the morning. Another crowded commute. Another long day ahead. Elly pressed her sketchbook close to her chest as she searched for an empty seat. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with sleeplessness after staying up most of the night, finishing her presentation slides for the internship program at Arcadia Media. When the bus jerked forward, she stumbled slightly, catching herself on the rail, and spotted a vacant seat beside a man in a pale gray shirt. He looked calm, reading through a printed document, his dark hair neatly combed. Elly mumbled a quiet, "Excuse me," and sat down. The motion of the bus rocked gently. Within minutes, her eyelids grew heavy. She tried to keep them open, but the rhythm of the road was hypnotic. The next moment, her head tilted sideways and landed softly on the stranger's shoulder. For a heartbeat, he froze. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. He glanced down at the sleeping girl beside him, wrinkled blazer, ID badge clipped to her tote, loose strands of hair brushing his sleeve. She looked exhausted, maybe even heartbroken. Something about her innocence disarmed him. He should have moved. He should have nudged her awake. But instead, he shifted slightly, steadying his shoulder so her head would not slip. The bus hit another bump, yet he stayed still, careful not to disturb her rest. Elly dreamt in flashes her mother's voice, the sound of rain against her window, the anxious reminder of rent due next week. A soft warmth beneath her cheek made her sink deeper into sleep. When the bus screeched to a stop near 43rd Street, the man gently cleared his throat. Elly stirred, blinked, and realized where she was. Her face turned crimson. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she stammered, pulling back, clutching her bag. I did not mean to." "It is all right," he said, his voice low, calm, almost kind. "You look tired." Elly's embarrassment deepened. "Thank you. I really need to learn to stay awake." She stood quickly, the bus rocking beneath her feet. "Have a good day, sir." As she hurried toward the exit, a small plastic card slipped from her bag and fell near his shoe. He picked it up. The laminated badge read, "Elly Tran, Arcadia Media, Communications Intern." He turned the card over in his hand, his expression thoughtful. The corners of his mouth lifted again, just slightly, before he tucked the badge into his notebook. Outside, Elly stepped off into the drizzle, her heart still racing. She muttered under her breath, half laughing at herself. "Great, Elly. Day one of your big internship, and you just drooled on a stranger's shoulder." She shook her head, tightened her coat, and began walking toward the towering glass building ahead. Upstairs, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She adjusted her badge lanyard only to realize it was gone. Panic flickered through her chest. She searched her bag twice. Nothing. A sigh escaped her lips. "Perfect start," she whispered. Meanwhile, across town, the man from the bus stepped into his private office on the top floor of the same building. The skyline of Manhattan stretched behind him. He placed the ID card carefully on his desk. His assistant knocked, announcing the morning schedule. "Cancel my first meeting," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the name printed on the badge. "I want to stop by the internship briefing today." The assistant hesitated. "Yes, Mr. Cole." "Oh." Ethan Cole, founder and chief executive officer of Arcadia Media, leaned back in his chair. The faintest trace of a smile crossed his face as he whispered to himself, "Elly Tran, the girl who fell asleep on my shoulder." Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware that a simple accident on a crowded bus had just rewritten two destinies. The morning sun slipped through the tall windows of Arcadia Media, painting golden lines across the polished floor. Elly hurried down the corridor, clutching her laptop and trying not to trip over her own shoes. Her missing badge still bothered her, but she had printed a temporary pass at the reception. She told herself to breathe, to focus, to make this internship work no matter what. Inside the conference room, rows of young interns filled the seats, whispering softly. Coffee cups steamed on the long table. The projector hummed quietly. Elly slid into a chair near the back, her notebook already open. When the clock struck 9, the glass door opened. Conversations died instantly. A tall man entered, dressed in a charcoal suit. His presence shifted the air. He looked calm, confident, yet his eyes searched the room with quiet curiosity. Elly's pen froze in midair. Her stomach dropped. It was him, the man from the bus, the stranger whose shoulder had been her accidental pillow. He smiled politely at the room. "Good morning, everyone. I am Ethan Cole, founder and chief executive officer of Arcadia Media. Welcome to our summer internship program." Elly's mind went blank. Chief executive officer? Her heart hammered in her chest. She sank lower in her seat, praying he would not notice her. But Ethan's gaze brushed across the crowd and paused for a fraction of a second when it found her. A flicker of recognition passed through his eyes, subtle but unmistakable. He continued speaking, his voice smooth, controlled. Arcadia is built on creativity, integrity, and human stories. Each of you has a chance to show not just your skills, but your heart. I believe great ideas come from empathy. Elly stared at her notes but could not hear half the words. Her face burned. He knows. He must remember. She imagined him laughing about it later with his staff, telling them about the sleepy girl from the bus. After the session ended, the interns broke into groups. Ethan moved through the room, shaking hands, offering brief encouragements. When he reached her row, Elly kept her head down, pretending to organize her things. "Miss Tran," he said quietly. Her fingers froze. She looked up, startled. "Yes, sir?" His tone was calm, almost kind. "You left something on the bus yesterday." He placed her badge on the table in front of her. "I believe this belongs to you." Her mouth parted slightly. "You kept it?" He smiled faintly. It seemed important, and before she could say another word, he turned to greet another intern across the aisle. The room buzzed with chatter again, but Elly could barely move. Her thoughts tangled between gratitude and mortification. She pressed the badge to her chest as if to hide it. Later that afternoon, she sat at her assigned desk near the window, still replaying the morning in her head. Outside, the city glimmered in the haze of summer. She typed lines into her report, trying to drown her nerves in work. Across the office, through the glass wall, Ethan stood with his assistant, discussing the upcoming charity gala. He glanced toward the intern's corner, catching sight of Elly's focused expression. There was something refreshingly unpolished about her, an authenticity he rarely saw in the world of business meetings and polished smiles. When the workday ended, Elly gathered her things. As she left the building, she passed the lobby where Ethan was talking to the head of public relations. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. He nodded in quiet acknowledgement, nothing more. Outside, the evening wind carried the scent of rain. Elly pulled her coat closer and started her walk to the bus stop. The day had felt like a dream, too strange to be real, too real to ignore. Back in his office, Ethan looked out at the skyline, the lights shimmering like scattered stars. He picked up his phone, paused, then set it down again. He did not understand why he felt drawn to this young woman who had dozed on his shoulder. Maybe it was her honesty, or the way she tried to hide her embarrassment with determination. He turned toward the framed motto on the wall. "Find stories that remind people they are human." For the first time in months, that line meant something personal. Across town, Elly sat on the bus ride home, gazing out the window as raindrops streaked the glass. Her reflection looked tired, but strangely hopeful. She thought about his words that morning, creativity, integrity, empathy, and whispered to herself, "I can do this." As the bus rolled through the streets of New York, she did not notice the sleek black sedan that turned onto the same route a few blocks behind her. Inside, Ethan glanced out the window toward the bus in the distance, an unreadable smile playing on his lips. Fate had already begun its quiet work. The next few days at Arcadia Media moved quickly, but for Elly, every hour felt like a delicate balancing act between excitement and panic. She threw herself into her work, determined to prove she belonged there. The company's open space buzzed with energy interns tapping keyboards, creative teams debating campaign ideas, phones ringing with clients from Los Angeles to Boston. Elly sat at her small desk near the window, sketchbook open beside her laptop. She had been assigned to a new marketing project, one that focused on connecting city commuters through shared human moments. The concept fascinated her. During lunch breaks, she filled pages of her sketchbook with ideas, people giving up seats, strangers sharing umbrellas, and a headline that read, "Warm Bus Project." That afternoon, her supervisor announced that a few interns would present their early concepts to a visiting executive for feedback. When the door opened, Elly's heart skipped. Ethan Cole stepped in. No tie today. Sleeves rolled, his demeanor calm but attentive. He listened to the first intern's pitch, nodding thoughtfully. When it was Elly's turn, her voice trembled at first, but she steadied herself. "I want to tell small stories," she said. "Not about products or brands, but about kindness in daily life. Sometimes the smallest gesture, a smile, a shared seat can change a day." Ethan's expression softened as he recognized the inspiration. The bus. He could still remember the weight of her head on his shoulder, the quiet trust of a stranger. He leaned forward slightly. "That is a beautiful thought," he said. "Do you have something visual to support it?" Elly opened her sketchbook, revealing hand-drawn frames. A woman giving her coat to an old man. A child offering candy to a tired commuter. A headline at the bottom, "Warm Bus, Warm Heart." The room fell silent. Even her supervisor looked impressed. Ethan smiled faintly. "Keep developing this. It has something real." After the meeting, Elly exhaled, her heart racing with relief. She had done it. When she walked out of the conference room, Ethan was standing by the elevator. "You have a good instinct," he said. "You see people as they are." "Thank you, sir," she said, trying to stay professional, though her cheeks flushed. "You can call me Ethan," he replied, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "It is easier." She smiled shyly. "Only if you call me Elly." He chuckled softly. "Deal." From that day, their paths began to cross more often. Ethan would stop by the intern's corner to check on progress. He asked for her opinion during creative meetings, sometimes stayed behind to chat about art, color, or why people connect to stories. Each conversation was short but meaningful, and something unspoken grew between them: respect, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. Late one evening, the office lights dimmed as the last few employees left. Elly remained at her desk, finishing edits on her campaign file. She was humming quietly when a low voice said, "Still here?" She turned and found Ethan standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing one to her. She laughed softly. "You are officially saving me from falling asleep at work." He smiled. "That would not be the first time, would it?" Her eyes widened. "You remember that?" "Of course," he said gently. "It was the nicest accident that ever happened to me." The air seemed to pause. Elly's breath caught. For a moment, the city noise outside faded into silence. Then she smiled, nervous but warm. "Well, I am glad I did not ruin your shirt that day." He laughed quietly, his gaze steady. "You did not ruin anything." They talked for a while about long hours, about art, about how both of them sometimes felt like outsiders in their own worlds. Elly told him about her dream of opening a small community gallery where young artists could exhibit without paying rent. Ethan listened, genuinely, as if her words mattered. When they finally left the office, the night air was cool and still. The streets were quiet, and the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. They walked to the subway entrance together. Before parting, Ethan said softly, "Elly, keep that sketchbook close. One day, it might change everything." "Oh," she looked up at him, unsure how to respond. "Thank you for believing in it." He nodded, his voice low. "I believe in people who see beauty where others do not." She carried those words home, replaying them like a song she could not forget. Later, in her small apartment, Elly opened her sketchbook again. On the first page, she wrote in careful letters, "The Warm Bus Project, dedicated to the stranger who offered kindness without knowing my name." End of. Outside her window, the city moved as always. But tonight, it felt different, softer, almost alive. She smiled to herself, unaware that Ethan, sitting alone in his penthouse office, was looking at the same sketch she had shown him earlier, printed from her presentation slides. He traced a finger along the drawing of the bus and whispered to the empty room, "She has something special." Neither of them realized it yet, but the line between coincidence and destiny had already begun to blur. A week later, the interns were called to prepare a major presentation for Arcadia's new social campaign. The office felt electric, filled with movement and tension. Elly's concept, the Warm Bus Project, had caught the attention of the creative board, and Ethan personally requested that her team refine it for the final pitch. It was the kind of opportunity interns only dreamed about. For Elly, the pressure was immense. Every morning she arrived early, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. Ethan often stopped by to check progress, asking questions that made her think deeper. He was not just a boss now. He was a quiet mentor, sometimes even a friend. One evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, he invited her to walk with him to the rooftop terrace. The air was soft, touched by the scent of rain from a passing storm. They leaned against the railing, the city stretching endlessly below. "You have changed the tone of this campaign," Ethan said, his voice thoughtful. "You made it about real people." Elly smiled faintly. "That was the point, I think. To remind people they still matter to one another." He glanced sideways at her. "You remind me of how I used to think when I first started Arcadia." She laughed quietly. "You mean before all the meetings and headlines?" "Before I forgot that work could have a heartbeat," he replied. For a moment, they simply stood there, the wind brushing through Elly's hair. She turned to face him, her voice soft. "I think you still have that heartbeat, Ethan. You just needed a reminder." Their eyes met, and something unspoken lingered between them. The city noise faded to a hum. He could see the reflection of lights dancing in her eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir that had nothing to do with ambition. The next morning, Elly returned to her desk to find a note on her sketchbook. It read, "See me in the creative studio at 7. Her pulse quickened. When she entered the studio that evening, Ethan was there, surrounded by prototype posters for the Warm Bus Project. "I wanted you to see this first," he said. The posters showed real people photographed on city buses, smiling, helping one another. "This is your vision, Elly. You brought humanity back into the brand." Her throat tightened. "I just told a story." He stepped closer, his tone low but steady. "And sometimes, that is all it takes to change the way people see the world." They stood side by side, looking at the bright prints. The space between them seemed to hum with quiet energy. Ethan spoke again, softer now. "Would you join me at the charity gala next week? I think your work deserves to be celebrated." Elly hesitated, caught between pride and disbelief. "You mean, as part of the team?" "As my guest," he said simply. For a second, she could not find words. The invitation felt larger than it sounded, an opening into a world far beyond her reach. She nodded slowly. "All right, I will be there." As she left the studio, her heart fluttered. The night air was cool against her skin, and she smiled without realizing it. Behind her, Ethan watched the door close, his expression thoughtful. Something about this young woman reminded him of the person he had once been: hopeful, fearless, unafraid to believe in goodness. Neither of them knew that the upcoming gala would change everything, that their quiet connection was about to collide with the dazzling world of power, reputation, and secrets. For now, there was only the city below them, and a fragile promise in the air. The night of the charity gala arrived with glittering lights and polished marble floors. Cars lined the entrance of the Grand Arcadia Hall, where chandeliers cast golden reflections over a sea of tuxedos and satin gowns. Elly stood near the entrance, smoothing her simple navy dress, her hands trembling slightly. It was her first formal event, and every detail around her felt larger than life. Ethan appeared through the crowd, looking every bit the image of success in a tailored black suit. Yet when his eyes found hers, the tension in her chest eased. He smiled, offering his arm. "You made it." She nodded, smiling nervously. "I almost turned back at the door." "Good thing you did not," he said. "Tonight is important for both of us." As they entered the ballroom, music swelled from the orchestra. Colleagues and investors greeted Ethan with firm handshakes and polite nods. Some looked at Elly with mild curiosity, trying to place her. She felt small among them, but Ethan's calm presence kept her grounded. Later, when the lights dimmed and the host began the evening's announcements, Ethan leaned close and whispered, "Stay for the keynote. There is something you should hear." The master of ceremonies spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor the work of Arcadia Media and its new social campaign that reminds us of kindness and connection in everyday life. Please welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Ethan Cole." Applause filled the hall. Ethan rose and walked toward the stage, his posture confident, his expression unreadable. Elly clapped politely, unaware of what was coming. He began to speak, his voice steady. "When I founded Arcadia, I believed success came from ambition. But lately, I have learned that true success begins with empathy, with the courage to see people as more than data or profit. This project, the Warm Bus Project, began not with me, but with one of our interns. Her name is Elly Tran." The crowd murmured. Elly froze, her breath caught in her throat. Ethan continued, his eyes finding hers through the bright lights. "She reminded me that compassion is not weakness, it is strength. Her story and her vision brought this campaign to life, and tonight, I want her to be recognized for it." Applause erupted again, louder this time. The spotlight shifted toward her. Elly's heart raced as people turned to look. She wanted to disappear, yet something inside her swelled with quiet pride. After the speech, Ethan stepped down from the stage. Cameras flashed as he approached her. "I meant every word," he said softly. She stared at him, her voice trembling. "You should have told me you planned to say that." "I wanted it to be genuine," he replied. "You earned it, Elly." But before she could respond, a voice behind them cut through the noise. "So this is why the CEO has been so distracted." It was one of the senior directors, a sharp smile on his face. "An intern, how inspiring." The words carried just enough sarcasm to sting. A few nearby guests exchanged knowing glances. Heat rushed to Elly's cheeks. She stepped back, the sparkle of the evening suddenly feeling like a spotlight of judgment. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That is enough, Greg." The man raised his glass mockingly. "Just business, Ethan. You know how it looks." The whisper of scandal rippled through the crowd. Elly lowered her gaze, gripping her clutch to keep her hands from shaking. "I need some air," she whispered, and turned toward the balcony. Outside, the city spread below in a glittering blur. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, the music continued, but inside, something cracked. Back in the ballroom, Ethan stood under the lights, applause fading around him. The night meant to honor kindness had just opened the door to gossip and doubt, and for the first time in years, he did not know how to fix it. The night air on the balcony was sharp and cold. Elly leaned on the railing, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading behind her. Below, the city stretched endlessly, but all she could see was the reflection of bright lights on her tears. The gala had turned from dream to nightmare in a heartbeat. She had wanted to be seen for her work, not to become a rumor whispered through champagne glasses. Footsteps echoed softly behind her. "Elly." Ethan's voice carried the weight of apology. She did not turn. "You should go back inside. They are waiting for you." "I do not care about them right now," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You should. You are the face of this company. They already think I am some kind of distraction." He stepped closer, his tone firm but gentle. "You are not a distraction. You are the reason this project even exists." Elly turned to face him, her eyes shimmering under the balcony lights. "Then why did you not tell me? You put me in that spotlight, and now everyone thinks I am here because of you." Ethan hesitated. The truth was more complicated than she could know. He had wanted to protect her, to show the board that heart still mattered more than hierarchy, but he had underestimated how cruel appearances could be. "I wanted to honor you," he said softly. "Not to hurt you." "Well, you did," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You turned something real into a story for everyone to judge." Silence hung between them, thick with things unsaid. Inside, the orchestra began another song, muffled by the glass doors. Ethan looked down, then spoke quietly. "When you fell asleep on that bus, it reminded me of how simple life used to feel. I wanted to hold on to that honesty, but somewhere along the way, I made it complicated." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. She could not decide if she was angry or just heartbroken. He took a step back, his expression pained. I will fix this, Elly. I promise. She looked at him, the man she had begun to trust, and shook her head. You cannot fix what people think, Ethan. Maybe I should just walk away before it gets worse. The words cut deeper than she expected. Without waiting for his response, she turned and left the balcony, the click of her heels fading down the marble hall. Inside the ballroom, she moved quickly through the crowd, ignoring the curious glances. Outside the grand doors, a cold drizzle had started to fall. She wrapped her arms around herself and walked into the night, tears mixing with the rain. Ethan remained on the balcony long after she left. His reflection stared back from the glass, distant and hollow. For the first time, the success he had built his life on felt meaningless. The woman who had reminded him of his own humanity now wanted nothing to do with him. When he finally went back inside, the hall was clearing. The senior director, Greg, stood near the bar, smirking as if he had won some invisible game. Ethan's gaze hardened. Enjoying yourself? Just doing my job, Greg replied. Protecting the company's image. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. If I find out you spread those rumors, I will make sure you never work in this industry again. Greg's smile faltered. Ethan turned away and walked out, his jaw tight, his heart heavier than it had been in years. Outside, the rain poured harder. He looked down the street, half expecting to see Elly under the awning, but she was gone. The city lights blurred through the storm, and for the first time, Ethan Cole, the man who had everything, felt utterly powerless. The next morning, gray clouds hung over the city like heavy curtains. Elly sat at her small kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. Her phone buzzed with calls from her supervisor, emails from the public relations department, but she could not bring herself to answer. The image of the gala replayed again and again in her mind. The spotlight, the whispers, Ethan's face frozen in helpless silence. By the afternoon, she finally opened her laptop and read the company's internal memo. Her name was nowhere mentioned, but the tone was clear. Arcadia Media was reviewing the professionalism of recent public events. The words cut deep. They were not only questioning her work, they were questioning her integrity. A knock sounded on her door. When she opened it, she found Ethan standing there, drenched from the rain. His eyes were tired, his usual calm replaced by quiet urgency. Elly, please let me explain, he said. There is nothing left to explain, she replied, stepping aside, reluctantly to let him in. The damage is done. They think I am involved with you. I am the intern who got special treatment. That is not true, he said, his voice firm. I already confronted Greg and the board. They will know the truth soon enough. Elly crossed her arms, her voice trembling. And what happens after that? Even if they believe you, I will still be the story people whisper about. I worked so hard for this chance, Ethan. I cannot lose it because of whatever this is between us. He stepped closer. Elly, I will not let them destroy your name. You earned everything through your own work. I will make sure they see that. She shook her head, fighting tears. You cannot protect me from perception. Once people decide who you are, it sticks. You taught me that when you told me about leadership, it is action, not titles. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Rain tapped softly against the window, a steady rhythm that filled the space between them. Finally, Ethan exhaled. If leaving is what you need, I will understand. But please do not think for a second that I ever used you, or that your success was not real. Elly met his eyes. I know you did not mean to hurt me, but I have to stand on my own now. He nodded slowly. Then let me help you do that. The next day, Ethan called an emergency meeting with the Arcadia board. The room was tense, filled with executives whispering among themselves. He stood at the head of the table, his voice steady. If you want to question anyone's professionalism, question mine. Elly Tran's project brought this company positive attention and public trust. If you cannot see that, then you have forgotten what Arcadia stands for. Some members exchanged uneasy glances. Greg shifted in his seat, looking away. Ethan continued, his tone unwavering. From this moment forward, no rumor about her will circulate again. I will personally ensure that. By evening, the company sent out a new press release. It credited the Warm Bus project to its full creative team, naming Elly as the concept's original author. Her reputation was restored, but the silence between her and Ethan remained heavy. When she read the statement, Tears welled in her eyes. She knew he had kept his promise. Yet, deep down, she also knew this might have been the price of their connection. That night, Ethan stood by his office window, watching the rain fall over the city. His reflection stared back at him, weary but resolute. He whispered to the empty room, "Leadership is not about control. It is about doing what is right, even when it costs you what you care for most." Outside, the lights of New York shimmered through the rain, cold, distant, and full of unspoken longing. 2 weeks later, Arcadia Media hosted a new exhibition in its downtown gallery space. The walls were lined with photographs and illustrations from the Warm Bus Project. Images of strangers helping one another, stories of kindness captured through Elly's original sketches. At the entrance hung a sign that read, "Created and inspired by Elly Tran." When she walked in, the room was already full. Colleagues, press, and artists moved between displays, their voices warm and genuine. For the first time since the gala, Elly felt peace returning to her chest. Ethan appeared beside her quietly. He was dressed simply this time. No suit, no formality, just a man who had come to honor a promise. "This is all yours," he said softly. "Every frame, every word. You gave this company its heart back." Elly looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "You did not have to do this." "I did," he replied. "You reminded me what leadership really means. You reminded me what love looks like when it chooses honesty over pride." For a moment, the noise around them faded. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside was her original sketch, the one she had left in her office weeks ago, now framed with the inscription, "The Warm Bus Project, where kindness found its way home." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you." He smiled, his voice low. "No, Elly. Thank you for waking me up." A year later, spring returned to the city. The air was softer now, carrying the scent of rain and blooming tulips along the busy streets. On a quiet Sunday morning, a familiar bus rolled down 43rd Street, its advertisement panel painted with bright colors. Across it read, "The Warm Bus Project, where kindness travels." Inside that same bus, Elly sat by the window, sketchbook open on her lap. Her life had changed more than she ever imagined. The project had grown into a citywide initiative, inspiring volunteers and artists across the country. Arcadia Media had launched a foundation in her name, funding community art that connected strangers through small acts of compassion. As the bus slowed at a red light, someone stepped on board. She looked up and froze for a moment before smiling. Ethan Cole stood there, holding 2 coffees. His hair was slightly tousled, his smile easy. "Seat taken?" he asked. She laughed softly. "I suppose it is yours by destiny." He sat beside her, handing her a cup. "Hazelnut latte. 2 sugars, right?" She raised an eyebrow. "You still remember that?" "I remember everything," he said, his tone warm. "Especially the day you fell asleep on my shoulder." Elly blushed, shaking her head. "You are never going to let me live that down, are you?" "Not a chance," he replied, his smile deepening. They rode in silence for a moment, watching the city pass by. Outside, the streets were alive, people laughing, helping one another, carrying umbrellas for strangers. The world had changed a little, and so had they. Ethan glanced at her sketchbook. "Still drawing dreams?" "Always," she said. "It keeps me grounded." He nodded. "Then maybe it is time for a new dream." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring, elegant and understated. Elly stared, speechless. "Ethan," he took her hand gently. "You once said kindness could change a day. You changed my whole life. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were happy ones. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. 1,000 times yes. The passengers nearby clapped softly, unaware that they were witnessing the closing chapter of a story that had started on this very bus a year ago. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and she leaned against his shoulder, the same way she had once done without knowing who he was. Outside the window, sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering across the glass like liquid gold. The bus rolled on through the city, carrying them toward the next chapter of their lives. Ethan looked down at her, his voice gentle. "You know, this might still be the best mistake I have ever made." Elly smiled through her tears. "Then let us keep making the right kind of mistakes together." The camera of life, would have pulled back then the city, small beneath them. Two souls found in the chaos of millions. And as the bus disappeared into the distance, their story whispered a simple truth that echoed beyond words. Love begins where kindness dares to pause.